evening. So we are back for another reading of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, Stave 2, Part 3. If you haven't seen the other parts of the staves, please go back and watch those. I'm going to just start off with reading a little bit of what I have read before, and then we will continue. But first, I will tell you a little bit about Charles Dickens and the history of A Christmas Carol and the history of him. So when I pick this book back up again, feel free to jump ahead in the video if you just want to hear the story when I pick the book back up. It will be down here somewhere where I post what time frame that would be, if you don't want to listen to that portion of the video. That being said, here's a little bit more history about Charles Dickens. I'm going to mention a couple of interesting little details about Charles Dickens' family in this one, just to kind of give you a sense that not all was lost, and that he still had a little bit of support, even though his father was in the debtor's prison. So I'm going to focus this episode mainly around that. John, Charles Dickens' father, was a Navy officer who kind of liked to spend a little bit more than strictly necessary. He had a kind of questionable methods of spending money and ended up in Marshalsea debtor's prison when Charles was 12 years old, as mentioned in the previous video. Charles' mother, Elizabeth, moved in with him into the prison, and she actually wanted him to continue working at the warehouse after his father was released from the prison and served his time there, which Charles never forgave his mother for this. It was understandable because she was worried about everything going back to the way it was, and she wanted a little bit extra income. However, to ask a child to stay at a warehouse while you have the means to provide for it is kind of questionable at best, since the methods at the warehouse did not provide any safety or were questionable at best at taking care of children. But, you know, Victorian Britain, I guess. So the Dickens family had 8 children. There was Fanny, Alfred, Letitia, Harriet, Fred, another Alfred, who they called Elfie, and Augustus, as well as Charles. I think he was probably one of the youngest children. Later on, Charles had 10 of his own children: Charles Jr., Mary, Kate, Walter, Francis, Alfred, Sidney Smith, Henry, and Dora and Edward. Now, it's it's quite a big family, quite a long lineage, but I'm gonna focus on one of his siblings, and that would be Fanny. Fanny was actually well known in the community. She was one of the first students that went to the Royal Academy of Music, and she played piano there. She got an accolade and many a praise for her great skill in music and art. She was a fantastic singer, and she even got rewards and awards for her musical ability. The other thing about it is that since the Academy had only been founded in 1822, the very year she joined, she was given what history calls a exhibition, which is actually a scholarship in order to get in. and she was one of the most promising students of its first early days. Afterward, she would go on to marry Henry Barnet, and they would have a few children together, one of them being named Henry Fielding Dickens. Unfortunately, it seems that Henry passed away when he was just an infant, or just a small child, as it were. And I think you'll understand where I'm going with that reference. But without further ado, let's get on to the story, and we'll come back at the end as to why I mentioned those two family members specifically to Charles. So, we are back to reading. "What's the matter?" asked the spirit. "Nothing," said Scrooge. "Nothing. There was a boy singing a Christmas carol at my door last night. I should have liked to have given him something. That's all." The ghost smiled thoughtfully and waved its hand, saying as it did so, "Let us see another Christmas." Scrooge's former self grew larger at the words, and the room became a little darker and a little more dirty. The panels shrunk, the windows cracked, fragments of plaster fell out of the ceiling, and the naked laths were shown instead. But how all this was brought about, Scrooge knew no more than you do. He only knew that it was quite correct. That evening had happened so, that there he was, alone again, when all the other boys had gone home for the jolly holidays. He was not reading now, but walking up and down despairingly. Scrooge looked at the ghost, and with a mournful shaking of his head, glanced anxiously towards the door. It opened, and a little girl, much younger than the boy, came darting in, putting her arms about his neck, and often kissing him, addressing him, her dear, dear brother. "And I have come to bring you home, dear brother," said the child, clapping her tiny hands and bending down to laugh. "To bring you home, home, home." "Home, little Fan," returned the boy. "Yes," said the child, brimful with glee. "Home, for good and all. Home for ever and ever. Father is so much kinder than he used to be. That home is like heaven. He spoke so gently to me one dear night, and when I was going to bed, that I was not afraid to ask him once more if you might come home. And he said, yes, you should, and sent me in a coach to bring you. And you're to be a man," said the child, opening her eyes, "and are never to come back here. But first we're to be together all the Christmas long, and have the merriest time in all the world." "You're quite a woman, little Fan," exclaimed the boy. She clapped her hands and laughed, and tried to touch his head, but being too little, laughed again, and stood on tiptoe to embrace him. Then she began to drag him, in her childish eagerness, towards the door, and he, nothing loth to go, accompanied her. The terrible voice in the hall cried, "Bring down Master Scrooge's box, there!" And in the hall appeared the schoolmaster himself, who glared on Master Scrooge with a ferocious condescension, and threw him into a dreadful state of mind by shaking hands with him, and then conveyed him and his sister into the veriest old well of a shivering best parlour that ever was seen, where the maps upon the wall, and the celestial and terrestrial globes in the windows, were waxy with cold. Here he produced a decanter of curiously light wine, and a block of curiously heavy cake, and administered installments of those dainties to the young people at the same time, sending out a meagre servant to offer a glass of something to the postboy, who answered that he thanked the gentleman, but if it was the same tap as he had tasted before, he had rather not. Master Scrooge's trunk being by this time tied on to the top of the chaise, the children bade the schoolmaster good-bye right willingly, and getting used to it, drove gaily down the garden sweep, the quick wheels dashing on the hoar-frost, and snow from the dark leaves of the evergreens like spray. Always a delicate creature, whom a breath night have withered, said the ghost. But she had a large heart. So she had, cried Scrooge. You're right. I will not gainsay its spirit. God forbid. She died a woman, said the ghost, and had, I think, children. One child, Scrooge returned. True, said the ghost. Your nephew. Scrooge seemed uneasy in his mind, and answered briefly, yes. Though they had but a moment left, the school behind him, they were now in the busy thoroughfares of a city, where shadowy passengers passed and repassed, where shadowy carts and coaches battled for the way, and all the strife and tumult of real city were. It was made plain enough by the dressing of the shops that here too it was Christmas time again. But it was evening, and the streets were lighted up. The ghost stopped at a curtain warehouse door, and asked Scrooge if he knew it. Know it, said Scrooge. Was I apprenticed here? They went in. A sight of an old gentleman in a Welsh wig, sitting behind such a high desk that if he had been 2 inches taller, he must have knocked his head against the ceiling. Scrooge cried in great excitement, "Why, it's old Fezziwig! Bless his heart, it's Fezziwig alive again!" Old Fezziwig laid down his pen and looked up at the clock, which pointed to the hour of 7. He rubbed his hands, adjusted his capricious waistcoat, laughed all over himself, from his shoes to his organ of benevolence, and called out in a comfortable, oily, rich, fat, jovial voice, "Yo-ho there, Ebenezer! Dick!" Scrooge's former self, now grown a young man, came briskly in, accompanied by his fellow prentice. "Dick Wilkins, to be sure," said Scrooge to the ghost. "Bless me! Yes, there he is. He was very much attached to me, was Dick. Poor Dick! Dear, dear." "Yo-ho, my boys," said Fezziwig. "No more work tonight. Christmas Eve, Dick. Christmas, Ebenezer. Let's have the shutters up," cried old Fezziwig, with a sharp clap of his hands, "before a man can say Jack Robinson." You wouldn't believe how those two fellows went at it. They charged into the street with the shutters. 1, 2, 3. Had 'em up in their places. 4, 5, 6. Bared him and pinned him. 7, 8, 9. And came back before you could got to 12, panting like racehorses. "Hilly-ho!" cried old Fezziwig, skipping down from high desk in wonderful agility. "Clear away, my lads. Let's have lots of room here. Hilly-ho, Dick. Cheery up, Ebenezer." Clear away. There was nothing they wouldn't have cleared away, nor could have cleared away, with old Fezziwig looking on. It was done in a minute. Every movable was packed off as if it were dismissed from public life for evermore. The floor was swept and watered. The lamps were trimmed, fuel was heaped upon the fire, and the warehouse was so snug and warm and dry and bright a ballroom as you would desire to see upon a winter's night. In came a fiddler with a music book, and went up to the lofty desk, and made an orchestra of it, and turned like 50 stomach aches. In came Mrs. Fezziwig, one vast substantial smile. In came the 3 Miss Fezziwigs, beaming and lovable. In came the 6 young followers whose hearts they broke. And in came all the men and women employed in the business. In came the housemaid with her cousin, the baker. In came the cook with her brother's particular friend, the milkman. And in came the boy from over the way who was suspected of not having board enough from his master, trying to hide himself behind the girl next door, but one, who was proved to have her ears pulled by her mistress. In they all came, one after another, some shyly, some boldly, some gracefully, some awkwardly, some pushing, some pulling. In they all came. Anyhow and everyhow, away they all went. 20 couple at once, hands half round, and back again the other way, down the middle and up again, round and round, in various stages of affectionate grouping. Old top couple always turning up in the wrong place, new top couples starting off again as soon as they got there. All top couples at last, and not a bottom one to help them. When this result was brought about, old Fezziwig, clapping his hands to stop the dance, cried out, "Well done!" And the fiddler plunged his hot face into a pot of porter especially provided for that purpose. But scorning rest upon his reappearance, he instantly began again, though there were no dancers yet, as if the other fiddler had been carried home exhausted on a shutter, and he were a brand new man resolved to beat him out of sight or perish. There were more dances, and there were more forfeits, and more dances, and there was more cake, and there was negus, and there was a great piece of cold roast, and there was a great piece of cold boiled, and there were 9 mince pies, and plenty of beer. But the great effect of the evening came after the roast and boiled, when a fiddler, an artful dog, mind, the sort of man who knew his business better than you or I could have told it to him, struck up, "Sir Roger Coldly." Then old Fezziwig stood out to dance with Mrs. Fezziwig. Top couple too, with a great good stiff piece of work cut out for them. 3 or 4 and 20 pair of partners, people who were not afraid to be trifled with, people who could dance and had no notion of walking. But if they had been twice as many, 4 times, old Fezziwig, would have been a match for them, and so would Mrs. Fezziwig. As to her, she was worthy to be his partner in every sense of the term. If that's not high praise, tell me higher, and I'll use it. A positive light appeared no issue from Fezziwig's calves. They shone in every part of the dance like moons. You couldn't have predicted at any given time what would become of them next, and when old Fezziwig and Mrs. Fezziwig had gone all through the dance, advance and retire, hold hands with your partner, bow and curtsy. Corkscrew, thread the needle, and back again to your place. Fezziwig, cut so deftly that he appeared to wink with his legs, and came upon his feet again without a stagger. When the clock struck 11, the domestic ball broke up. Mr. and Miss Fezziwig took their stations, one on either side of the door, and shaking hands with every person individually as he or she went out, wished him or her a Merry Christmas. When everybody had retired but the two prentices, they did the same to them, and thus the cheerful voices died away, and the lads were left to their beds, which were under the counter at the back of the shop. During the whole of this time, Scrooge acted like a man out of his wits. His heart and soul were in the scene, and with his former self. He corroborated everything, remembered everything, enjoyed everything, and underwent the strangest agitation. It was not until now, when the bright faces of his former self and Dick were turned from them, that he remembered the ghost, and became conscious that it was looking full upon him, while the light upon its head burnt very clear. "A small matter," said the ghost, "to make these silly folks so full of gratitude." "Small," echoed Scrooge. The spirit signed to him to listen to the two apprentices who were pouring out their hearts in praise of Fezziwig, and when he had done so, said, "Why, is it not? He has spent but a few pounds of your mortal money, 3 or 4, perhaps. Is that so much that he deserves this praise?" "Isn't it that?" said Scrooge, heated by the remark, and speaking unconsciously, like his former, not latter self. "Isn't it that, spirit? He has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. Say that his power lies in words and looks, in things so slight and insignificant, that this is impossible to add and count him up. What then? The happiness he gives is quite as great as if it cost a fortune." But he felt the spirit's glance, and stopped. "What is the matter?" asked the ghost. "Nothing particular," said Scrooge. "Something, I think," the ghost insisted. "No," said Scrooge. "No, I should like to be able to say a word or two to my clerk just now. That's all." His former self turned down the lamps as he gave utterance to the wish, and Scrooge and the ghost again stood side by side in the open air. "My time grows short," observed the spirit. "Quick!" And that is where we stop for tonight. Stay tuned for tomorrow, where we learn more. And if you were wondering, yes, Fanny is a tribute to Charles Dickens' actual sister, Fan.